For Mecha-Ude, Mechanical Arms, I mostly want to give an overview of the show and talk about why I've been watching it. This won't be a completely spoiler-free bit, because I do want to mention some specific examples to illustrate the things I've enjoyed or I thought were done well. But I am generally going to avoid too many specifics, or naming twists, or explaining how various crises wrap up. Rather, I want to give broad strokes about the kinds of things that happen, some of the ideas that it plays with, and then give a few specific examples of things like its humor. So if you have high spoiler tolerance and you haven't seen this, then this may still be okay for you, but if you have low spoiler tolerance, then you might want to skip it. So Mecha-Ude, Mechanical Arms, is actually an outgrowth of a single OVA episode that was funded through Kickstarter back in 2016, releasing in 2018. The success of that helps propel this full series project into reality, and the same woman behind the Kickstarter is still the director of this season-length work. That is the extent of what I know about her, so everything else I say is just conjecture from watching the show. And watching the show, I feel like it must be taking some inspiration from the Imaishi-directed works at Gainax and Trigger. At the very least, I often feel a similarity in the style of humor and the way it mixes with action sequences, as well as how indulgent it is with its speculative fiction elements. There's an establishment of the conceit of the story as something that just is, and while there is care to make it internally consistent, there is no attempt to make it sound realistic, featuring a core mechanism that creates mechanical power-ups out of what is basically human spirit. There is likewise almost a playfulness with the departure from reality, and a willingness to try a lot of variations on its particular brand of fantastical elements. The result is something that is just downright fun to experience, while also feeling like a work that could have come out of an earlier age. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that it's partially an homage to an existing body of work, as that is how I sometimes feel while watching it. As to that conceit, here's the setup. The whole thing takes place in a city called Kitakagami, a place where a company called the Kagami Group is highly influential and highly respected, especially a historical figure named Yakumo Kagami that lived 100 years in the past. It's also home to a secret, and a secret war. There are entities called Mecha-Ude, which are machine life forms that rely on humans for their power, but confer extraordinary abilities on those who do so, and a struggle between two factions that utilize the Mecha-Ude to oppose one another. The Kagami Group is actually cast as the villains, as they use something called a shackle to suppress the will of the Mecha-Udes and use their powers directly, reducing them to mere tools. Opposing them is Arms, an underground paramilitary group who form partnerships with their Mecha-Ude and are appalled at the shackle usage. The inciting event is one Arms member, Aki, breaking into the Kagami Group labs to steal a dormant Mecha-Ude referred to as the Trigger Arm. In the fray, the cube-like Trigger Arm gets lost somewhere in the city. It cries out for help, and a completely uninvolved student named Hikaru is the one who hears it. Hikaru will hear the cry again the next day, and though he is a hesitant and uncertain person by default, he will feel compelled to seek it out. When touching the cube, then, it awakens and attaches itself to his hoodie. Its form is that of a large mechanical hand with a single eye. The process of attaching like this is called derising, though it is usually directly to the skin of the human, and once it happens, it's semi-permanent. A certain compatibility is required, and forceful removal has life-threatening consequences for the human without proper care, and depowers the Mecha-Ude into a dormant state. In short, Hikaru immediately goes from a nondescript high school student to the top priority for both warring factions in the city, and it's not something he can easily set aside, even if he immediately regrets becoming involved. Ordinarily, the Mecha-Ude can attract entirely within the bodies of whoever they are derised to, which is what allows this to be a secret war. Aki is our early introduction to how the partnership usually works, as her twin Mecha-Ude emerge from her hips when needed. The Mecha-Ude make her physically skilled and powerful, but they also have their own abilities and personalities as well. In her case, they are one part grasping, striking claw, and one part rocket propulsion, but the Mecha-Ude have a wide array of shapes, colors, and functions. She makes contact with Hikaru first, and with some difficulty, would be the reason that he gets involved with the Arms militia rather than being captured by the Kagami Group. However, our final main character is a boy named Jun, the younger brother of the head of the Kagami Group, who had his own eye on the Trigger Arm as a way to fix his sickly body and live up to the high expectations placed upon him. We thus end up with 3 pools of characters between ARMS, the Kagami group, and the high schoolers, and each has their own extended, colorful cast. And since this is just as much humor as it is action, they are quite colorful indeed, as much of the humor derives from extreme personality traits, absurdity, and slapstick, frequently intermixed with situations that should be life or death. This keeps the prevailing tone of the series playful, like it isn't taking itself too seriously as a general rule. But when it does get serious, it shows itself capable of giving proper weight and gravity to the personal struggles that are a frequent undercurrent and motivator for our main cast. So that is probably the first thing to mention that I've enjoyed about the series, that it isn't a single thing or a simple two-sided struggle. The Kagami group uses shackles to control Mecha-Ude, but we meet a group within them called the White Ravens who actually form partnerships with theirs just like ARMS does. And while there are humans who do basically enslave and control some of the Mecha-Ude, we also meet Mecha-Ude that can do the same to humans, even delighting in the cruelty that they can inflict by doing so. Members of both factions will conceal their plans from allies for very good reasons, and we have obviously evil people working towards good ends alongside the reverse. And in the heart of it, we have 4 main characters who each have internal hang-ups or pasts that plague them, and each must be addressed over the course of the work, not just for characterization, but for the ways they impact the narrative. Aki is driven by revenge, searching for the Mecha-Ude user who killed her entire family. She has retracted from all else in life, detached from others and her emotions, only her Mecha-Ude for companionship. Jun is sickly, and his older brother constantly calls him a failure, an embarrassment to the family that should remain out of sight. The ensuing inferiority complex, combined with the merciless meritocracy in the Kagami group, makes him someone prickly and confrontational, no better suited to socialization than Aki. But they're both basically good kids, traumatized and damaged by their circumstances, but neither lacks for determination. Hikaru, then, is the normal one in terms of a past, but feels exceedingly normal in the sense of being unexceptional. He hesitates, he doubts, he constantly feels like he can't do anything. And Alma, which is the Trigger Arm's name, has amnesia, knowing nothing of his past or purpose. He will be a warm and selfless encouragement for Hikaru for a time, but once reunited to his memories, he has his own fear and regret to constrain him. Each of these 4 largely overcome their internal crises and interactions with one another, even though those interactions are confrontational more often than not. Now, speaking of Alma, one of the things I like a lot in the series is the expressiveness of the characters, and even though Alma is a mechanical arm with one eye, he is no exception. Hands are kind of expressive anyway, but I'm impressed by how much body language he conveys with just the simple addition of an eye that can emulate lids or brows. I find myself watching him in most scenes and marveling at the effort required to make him seem so personable, and his emotions so recognizable. Of course, the same goes for the human characters, and I'm going to use Aki as an example because she has the narrowest range. Starting out, she is mostly either stoic or angry, and in later scenes, she is still, well, mostly stoic or angry. Occasionally, she is just determined, and sometimes she is angry to the point of funny, but there's a part when she is thinking of betraying Hikaru, and these same set of expressions take on a different, rawer edge. It's subtle, but enough to be noticeable at that point as a variation. Then, in another instance, she will be grateful that he saved her from peril, and her stoic default will soften for just a moment as she lets herself be vulnerable. Though, to be sure, a lot of time the expression work is for the sake of humor, such as the end of the premiere when she transfers into his class, decides she is going to sit beside him even if she has to bring the desk with her, and gives him this great dead-eye stare as she pretends to introduce herself for the first time. And so I think I will also share a couple of examples of the series' sense of humor. There's a bit when Aki and Hikaru are fighting in an abandoned school, and while fleeing, Alma points out the sign that says there's no running in the hallway, which, of course, Hikaru ignores. When Aki prepares to give chase, her Mecha-Udes, Sinus and Dex, say the same thing. So she says, well, fly then, and they do, flying right past Hikaru, in fact. There's lots of nice idiot logic like that in the show. There's also good awareness of tropes that gets subverted for humor. For example, a moment when Aki is flying with Hikaru and another guy through the air into a fight, but she is intercepted on the way, while the other two's inertia carries them on what seems a collision course with the other opponents. It then cuts away from that for nearly 3.5 minutes while Aki fights, only to come back with them still hanging in the air. Obviously, it's important we see that they will collide with the others and turn the tide, but no, they crash harmlessly between them. Trope subverted. Until 1 minute later, when an explosion goes off behind them, they fly through the air and this time do connect. You sly dogs. Speaking of tropes, Aki's Mecha-Ude emerged from her hips, necessitating that she only wear skirts, and that probably sounds like she was designed that way to justify frequent fan service. Instead, they rather painstakingly animate her many fight sequences in such a way to avoid just that, or position something that blocks the view. It almost feels like some kind of self-imposed challenge. Aki is also a big eater, which used to be a rather common anime characterization trope, but has fallen out of use. It's also mostly used for humor, and a way to characterize her as simple. However, the fact that she's the first Mecha-Ude user we meet obscures something from us. She is actually exceedingly rare in using more than one at a time. We will meet a Kagami Group henchman who insists on using 3 at once, and soon discover the problem. He runs out of stamina after only a few minutes of fighting. Aki is a big eater because the human users power the Mecha-Ude, and she is using double what most others can manage. And her dual wielding is not just something that exists because of the rule of cool, but is part of her backstory. One of her dead family members is her twin sister, who actually was the original user of Sinus, the left one. She wields both because Sinus is basically part of the only family she has left. To me, all that indicates a thoughtfulness in the design of the show, that even though a lot of it is about contests of willpower and cool transforming sapient appendages, it's not some mindless schlock of action and spectacle. It's goofy and playful at times, and reaches for maximum hype at others. And in between, we have these vulnerable, struggling main characters who are just awkward enough to feel authentic and make us root for them, even when they're at cross purposes. I've had a blast so far, and realizing that I wish there were more series like this in